Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of our Mr. Oculio podcast. Tonight is a very special one, and one I've been actually very excited to bring to you guys. And tonight we are actually going to be discussing Washington, D.C. during the Civil War. Some touching up on a little bit of Lincoln's inauguration in 1861 and 1864, and compare a little bit of that into today's climate in Washington. Joining me today are two very special guests. I have John Launius, and I have historian Steve Phan as well. Guys, hello and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Of course, we all know Steve is the real star of the show here tonight.
That's right. That's right. That's why I'm here, folks, to boost the viewership. Honored to be here. It's good to be amongst friends.
No, absolutely.
Civil War Washington. I think very underappreciated topic of the conflict. And I think that the events from the past, obviously, several weeks, it's kind of brought back to the attentions, the symbolic importance of the city, of course, and then just like what was it like in 1861 and 1864, right? It was the more we look back, it wasn't that different from what was going on right now.
No, absolutely, I agree. And one of the things I think that a lot of even the local newspapers, and I know the Washington Post has said it probably 5-10 times, the comparison of troops being stationed outside of the Capitol building, and comparing that to 1861 when the newspapers were printing pictures of troops in the unfinished Capitol rotunda. I mean, I think that alone just kind of set a tone for how 2021 was starting. It was very weird. 6 days in, we see armed or not armed, an unarmed mob storming the Capitol building. I mean, and that was kind of a like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah, I mean, probably one of the most iconic pictures to have come out of this month, and what very well maybe one of the most iconic pictures of our era is the picture of the National Guardsmen sleeping on the floor next to the monument, honoring U.S. troops who had been quartered in that building during the Civil War.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean,
yeah, I was thinking about that as well, and it's interesting. The Civil War is never that far away from the American consciousness, right? And so there's, in times of trials and turmoil, even popular news, like they'd like to reference the Civil War, right? And so, you heard a lot of newscasts. This is the most troops that have been in D.C. since the Civil War, right? There are National Guard soldiers sleeping inside the Capitol the first time since the Civil War, right? And they're showing sketches from that period, as you two were talking about. It's kind of interesting bringing that back to light.
I agree. I mean, I think that's something that a lot of people make connections with. It was just an easy thing for a lot of people to make connections with and kind of show the severity of where things were at or are at even. We haven't had even remote enough time to heal. It's just day one of a new presidency, a new administration, and that's what I think is touching a lot of American hearts right now, is just trying to soak up everything that has happened again and find something to compare it to. And one of the things I really like to talk about, I may have brought it up in this podcast before, is there was a book I read earlier in 2020. It was written by John Meacham, and it was called Our Better Angels. I don't know if you've read that or maybe you've seen the title of that or not, but that was something I think.
Title, yeah. So what'd you get from that?
I got a lot out of that, actually. It was touching on different historical events that could have completely wrecked America. We go from like the Great Depression to the Civil War with Lincoln, and other sort of really tragic eras that the United States has suffered through, and it shows that a lot of the times the United States has still come out of that and found ways to at the time healed from that and begin to look at tackling the next big problem and the next thing to go through. And that, what we're going through right now is tumultuous by far. I mean, it's very horrible, but we have to look to our better angels, as that book tries to make, I guess, a good thesis, and see that at some point we will come out of this and we will reflect on this and be better as a people from an event like this, learning lessons from this. I thought that was really poignant and something that a lot of Americans, if they have the opportunity to read, should maybe pick up and look at. But that, it was just my opinion. I thought it was really well done, and we'll always keep that one on a bookshelf.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think
Absolutely.
It's, people, and I think that's why history is so important. And, we've got these flashpoints throughout history that we can reference, and we can kind of reflect back on other times of real trials and tribulations to kind of understand how people back then handled it, right? And so, and as something as conflicted as a civil war, as a rebellion, it's easy. I mean, I think it makes sense for people to reflect back on American history to understand where we're at. And I like the idea. I mean, of just the blunt honesty of people talking about the fragility of democracy, and imagine what that looked like during 1860 with that divided election. You know, when you've got basically four major candidates, and then you've got secession, and then you've got this. You know, and so, you know, if we talk about what's going on in D.C. during this period, you know, you've got this outgoing lame duck administration under James Buchanan, who's, you know, his top cabinet people are Southerners who are openly, you know, talking about secession and breaking away from. They're okay with the dissolution of the Union, and you've got the president himself trying to figure out what to do and hoping to make it to March before he can basically get the heck out of town, right?
And wash his hands of the whole thing.
Yeah, and trying to figure out what the hell this looks like. And so, you know, one of the first things he does, right? We've got the election in November of 1860, and then within a month or so, right? You've got South Carolina seceding from the Union, and so in mid-December, he recalls the grand old man of the army, as they referred to him. They recalled the general-in-chief, Winfield Scott, from his headquarters in New York City, and they told him to come to D.C. to basically ensure the safe and peaceful transfer of power from the outgoing administration to President-elect Abraham Lincoln. And so he's going to make his headquarters at the Windsor Building, about a block away from the White House, and he's going to spend a tremendous amount of energy over the next few months to ensure that that this does happen.
That's rather interesting as well to think about that. You know, they wanted to make sure that was going to happen as well to secure that election, just as they did here in D.C. You know, they wanted to make sure that the democratic process was still going to stay in play no matter what. And that's, you know, 95% of the reason those guardsmen are there, to show that, you know, no matter what, as a people, the democracy will, you know, still prevail through at the end of the day. And that's our institution. And that's, you know, that's something I think that was reflected in the inauguration even today, and that was spoken upon. And even the Civil War, like you said earlier, it touches almost every aspect of today, like within it's in the news or the popular culture or whatever it may be. It was evoked on the inauguration platform today. You know, that resorts right back to it. It was still brought up. It was that tribulation that we went through was brought up as an example of what we can move on through again.
Yeah, no, the Civil War was meant. Well, he said uncivil war, right? So
I believe so. I believe he said that. But there was at some point, I think they said something about what we've been through as a country, and I think that was one thing he brought up. Maybe is that we lived through a civil war, we lived through civil rights. You know, we lived through all this stuff.
And he quoted Lincoln as well.
Indeed,
so
he did.
We're never too far away from the Civil War. You know what I was thinking about? I saw last night. The National Guard talked about, the commanding general of the National Guard said that they had removed about 12 members because of I
read that, yeah.
You know, they might have some affiliations with some of these groups, which is really interesting. So, you know, when Winfield Scott gets to D.C. in December 1860, you know, obviously he's an old guy. He's not the healthiest guy. You know, he can't even mount a horse. But you know,
riddled with gout.
Yeah, exactly. His mind is there though, and he's he's obviously got this commanding presence. So he's going to turn to basically, you know, trusted subordinate officers to get the job done. And for the Civil War people listening, he turns to Charles Stone. You know, old Army regular. He makes him the Inspector General of D.C., and it's going to really be Charles Stone that kind of like spearheads the defense of the Capitol during this period. And one of the things he does is there's all these militia groups, you know, connected to that are in D.C., right? Mm-hmm. He basically purges them because he realizes that the vast majority of them have like allegiances to, you know, basically the growing Confederacy or Southern allegiances. And so he disbands them and reforms new ones with men of loyalty. So they're kind of like the first, you know, defense. Obviously, they're going to recall as much of the available regular army as they can, which is spread out west, as we know, thousands of miles away. And, you know, then he's also, I mean, getting back to the Capitol, he sets up this plan where the Capitol and the Treasury Building are basically these fortified citadels where they can make a defense of the Capitol. If I'm trying to recall the number of days, I think it's about 2 weeks.
Okay.
And within like the basement of these buildings, they have flour and water to basically survive
Oh my
long
God.
enough for the regular army to arrive to, basically rescue the capital. Like that's crazy, right?
Right.
Of course, in 1861, like that's a very real, legitimate concern. I mean, especially earlier in the year, maybe Virginia hasn't seceded yet, but it's not
Exactly.
far away, and you've got a situation where if you lose Virginia, you don't even have to lose Maryland. You just lose Baltimore, and the capital is effectively cut off from the rest of the country.
Right, and it's
Exactly.
stuck straight in the middle of two secession states. That's not going to go well for Washington whatsoever.
Yeah,
Now-
and if you've ever been to Washington, it's like the bottom of a bowl,
Absolutely.
So you've got like the Arlington Heights to the south across the Potomac River. You've got like and Southern Maryland is high ground.
It is indeed.
So the city itself is captured. I'm trying to remember the name of the author. I feel bad. She wrote about Washington D.C. and won Reveille in Washington, and she won the Pulitzer Prize for it. And she writes that Washington is a southern city. It might be a federal city, where people come 2 to 4 to 6 years and move on, but it's by nature and sentiment and character, it's a southern city.
It's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, there's a lot of the city is incredibly intense. Charles Stone talks about this. Winfield Scott talks about this, and so they're trying to kind of figure out how we take this necessary steps forward to secure the capital. So I think the events of the past couple of weeks, there really is a correlation here, and understanding how fragile democracy is and
Sure.
what's going to be necessary for it to survive at least for another administration, hopefully. And I'm sure they weren't too certain what was going to happen in the coming year, right? Obviously, they didn't know that. I mean, I think people sense that a war was coming, but it wasn't quite there yet. But let's get this guy inaugurated on the steps of the Capitol, and then we can kind of go from there, right?
Absolutely, and I think it was absolutely Lincoln that made this connection about the half-completed Capitol dome. That was one thing I really thought was awesome about how Lincoln goes about trying to restore the country when it's virtually splitting in half due to the topic of slavery there.
Right.
When he makes that speech, he says, I can't continue to have that dome. And of course, I'm not quoting directly. I'm just using what I would think he would have said. But he says something along the lines of that dome not being completed and it having to be completed to signify a country coming back together, because it's very symbolic of how the country was. You had the Washington Monument at one end of the National Mall, and that thing was also in that state of just half completed. And then you had the dome on the other side of the mall, half completed.
Right.
I mean, it shows how important the symbol of the Capitol building is. And I think, in a way, ironically, a lot of Americans had kind of discounted the symbol of the Capitol building until it was threatened very recently, and all of a sudden, the symbol of the Capitol building, I think, was very much.
It's a symbol of democracy,
right? But I think most people think of grand national buildings of the country. The average person is probably going to talk about the White House before.
Yeah,
sure.
John, I completely agree with you with that. I think when people think of DC, they think of the White House, right? Mm-hmm. And when we talk about the government, they think of the White House, even though, the Senate and the House are, and they're in the Capitol building. But getting back to your point as well, it is the temple of democracy, and I think it took an event as what happened on the 6th for people to kind of like recalibrate, be like, wow, that really is like the temple, right? And I think that's why so many people were taken aback by what happened. Like, wow, this is really happening.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
No, and John, I think you hit that was a great thing to say there, man. That was perfect. Like, I think that sums up a lot of people who feel strongly about what happened at the Capitol. That's what a lot of us, I think, connect to. Is there was a lot of people, I believe, and like you said, that didn't really think much of it. And then you see something like that on the news, and you're like, oh wow, like that's kind of powerful to look at.
Yeah, so it's interesting when I've been doing this research in regards to like DC throughout the Civil War, but especially like the period. I guess I've always really focused on like March moving forward, right after the inauguration. And then I had somebody ask me, you know, they're like, "What about March and like February?" And you know, like, what's going on? I'm like, "Oh, that's a really good question, you know, because I know I talked about, you know, the Army, you know, planning to make this defense on like the federal structures in D.C. But I was just kind of like going through some newspapers, and I found something last week which kind of blew my mind. And it was dated January 15th. So just 5 days ago, 1861, it was the Alexandria Gazette and Virginia Advertiser newspaper. And this is what it says: Washington City, General Scott, Winfield Scott, is still engaged in making preparations to guard against a possible breach of peace in Washington, consequent on the present political agitation. Effective military forces are to be posted in several parts of the city. It is not probable that any but regular troops and the militia of the district will be employed for this purpose. Like January 15th, right?
Wow.
That's
I
almost
mean,
a month before the election. I mean, before the inauguration.
Yeah.
Right? They're like,
that could be a
people
headline
know what's
today.
going on, right?
Absolutely could be a headline. I was like, holy crap. That's
Yeah.
okay.
So when I saw that date, I'm like January 15th, because you know, when I read of accounts of the inauguration, there's a heavy military presence, right? I mean, obviously it's
Right.
not as big as it was like in 2021, but there are cannons posted on the streets, on the bridges. There's cavalry vedettes kind of roaming the streets. There's infantry guys. There's guys on rooftops. Apparently, there were. Um, I read some account where there was, you know, federal soldiers basically wearing civilian outfits, just walking the crowd with armed with pistols, just in case anything broke out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And General Scott himself was on the street. I think he was near the Capitol for the while. But he was also seen around with his large staff, kind of just observing that everything was going to be okay, right?
Right.
And so, you know, like so, you hear a lot about in 1861 of the day, but the preparations being made as early as January. I was like, wow, that's pretty intense.
Though absolutely is intense. Well, with that being said, I have a question for you actually, because again, I'd started doing a little bit of research myself on Washington and the Civil War, especially again given what's been going on the last few weeks. One of the things I was reading was about it was the Tremont House or the Tremont Hotel that was ransacked by Democrats right after the election when Lincoln won, and they were, I guess, the wide awakes were the ones celebrating, and they came into the house with arms. I mean, we're shooting wildly into the air and screaming, burn it down," to the Tremont House Hotel, and screaming at these people huddled on a roof. Do you know anything about that, or care to touch on that a little bit?
I actually don't. I might have heard of this incident. Where exactly is this hotel at?
So it says it's 3 blocks from the Capitol, actually. I mean, I'll quote really quickly. This is coming
Okay.
straight from Ernest B. Ferguson's Freedom Rising. The quote here is, Tremont, burn the building, burn it down. Hiding on the roof of the ransacked Tremont House, 3 blocks from the United States Capitol, a handful of scared young Lincolnites peeked down at the shouting mob in the street, sure that they were in mortal danger. All that fall, the 1860 boisterous Republicans who called themselves Wide Awakes had marched along the avenues of northern cities in black oilcloth capes and caps, waving torches and carrying fence rails to show their enthusiasm for their candidate, the great rail splitter.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's like a way to evoke the first page of a book. I mean, that's what Ferguson did.
Right. Okay.
He snatched you right away with that.
Because I remember before we went live, we were talking about that book, and I guess I had read it, maybe not fully a couple years ago, but wow, yeah, that's quite the. And so they said that was election night in November of 1860.
Right, that was like the night he was elected.
Wow.
So, and that to me evoked a lot of the, you know, the I guess the comparisons from today. I was just like, what, the immediate storm the streets and went on like that. I just want to take a real quick break and let you guys know that Ryu Stream, well, I want to thank you for using Prime subscription and joining our Coolio Cast podcast. Thank you so much for joining, guys. Today we are joined with John Launius and Steve Phan. We are talking today about Washington, D.C. and the Civil War. Thank you again for joining with us. And we are now on the topic we just discussed, Ernest Ferguson's book on the Civil War, and the first page is about just some of the things we're seeing today and things we were seeing in 1861 and how similar some of these were. But with that as well, we also wanted, since Steve is here and we wanted to pick his brain a little bit, we're interested in some of the forts too, man. That's one thing we wanted to talk to you about, and how important those were to protecting the city of Washington. And we discussed that it's sitting directly between Maryland and Virginia, both states that were kind of explosive when it came to the topic of secession. Many things being gone to, take measures to make that not happen. Do you want to touch a little bit on that and how these forts are constructed and what's so important about them that there's so many surrounding the capital?
I mean, especially when, as you said earlier, DC is in low-lying ground.
Right.
How do you defend the bottom of a hill?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I've done research on the defenses of Washington, I realized that it really evolved over the course of the conflict, right? And so, as we just talked about a few minutes ago, I argue that the beginning of this defenses of Washington started with the arrival of Winfield Scott in December 1860, and then the development of the militia units there, ensuring Lincoln's inauguration, safe inauguration, peaceful inauguration on March 3rd, 1861. Mm-hmm. And then, what's going to happen next? There were some regular army, artillery, and cav companies around the city, but not too much. But obviously, Lincoln is pressed with a lot of issues when he becomes, the day he enters office. Right, you got the Fort Pickens issue, you've got Fort Sumter in South Carolina, and they're trying to figure out what to do. The second Fort Sumter falls in April. It's like we've got some trouble here, right? And so they're gonna we're gonna rush as many troops as we can to the city. Mostly 90-day, 3-month militia guys that can only be pressed into service for 30 months. But at the same time, Winfield Scott and then his commanders in Washington, including Joseph K. Mansfield, who's mortally wounded at Antietam in September of 1862. He's an engineer, and he's one of the leading he's one of the chief commanders in Washington. He's given orders by the army to basically figure out the natural defense of the capital, and so he's going to ride around the city with around the area with his one of his subordinate officers is John G. Barnard, a brilliant engineer himself. These guys are all West Pointers, right?
Yeah,
all regulars, and they're going to ride around the city, and they're just going to be like, we've got some issues here, and the most immediate threat is Virginia. We talked about Virginia, the status of Virginia, what's going to happen to Virginia, but it's all about the topography there. And, for people listening, I always say, if you've ever been to Arlington National Cemetery, if you're standing in front of the Lee House, just look north across the Potomac River, and that's what they were afraid of. It's formidable high ground. The Army was afraid that, rebel forces would roll in artillery and they could just shell this capital city at will. And so that was the immediate threat. And then east across what we now call the Anacostia River, there's also a long ridge line through about 300 feet above sea level, where they could also shell the naval yard and the arsenal as well. So there was these zones of immediate threat to the city. And, so they report back to Winfield Scott and they're like, hey, these are our issues here, and this is what you can do to remedy that. And future General Mansfield says you need to seize the initiative. So I think it shocks a lot of people when they hear how early the defenses of Washington were constructed. When they find out, when the federal government finds out that Virginia will indeed secede from the Union, that evening, May 23rd, 3 columns of U.S. troops cross the Potomac River and occupy Virginia. So they're going to start with Virginia, including the Arlington House. They're also going to do like a amphibious little operation and land troops on the water at Alexandria as well. And they're going to occupy these 2 strategic areas, right across the river from the capital. And the following day, they're going to start building earthworks. And about a half dozen will be built before the First Battle of Bull Run or Manassas. And, I call these forward operating bases. They're going to be used by the Army to basically secure their foothold on Northern Virginia, a falling back place for the Army if necessary, and a place to basically accumulate, supplies and men and things like that. They're only temporary. There weren't that many of them, but they were built. They were mounted with artillery pieces. And then obviously we had General Irvin McDowell was in charge of the occupational forces in Virginia. And of course, he was assigned the task of defeating this rebel army near Manassas. I'm sure most of the viewers know there's the first battle on July 21st, 1861, outside of Washington. At the end of the day, it goes very badly for federal forces, and they retreat. And by the way, when they retreat, they're given orders by General Scott to retreat to the protection of the fort's guns. So the forts were already effective, right? And so those forts, the soldiers fell back to Northern Virginia. Some of them crossed the Potomac River, and that was kind of the major catalyst for what I call the next major evolution of the defenses of Washington. Because a couple of days later, who comes out from Western Virginia? George B. McClellan. And when George B. McClellan is placed in command of all the troops in Washington, they start building this elaborate system of fortifications around the city under the supervision of promoted to Brigadier General John G. Barnard. I call him the defenses.
I was going to actually ask you some questions about him today, so without even me having to ask, you answered all of them, and I appreciate you much for that. Yeah. He was McClellan's chief engineer, right, from 1861 to 62, like summer of 62, I think it was. Late summer 62?
Yeah, it's really interesting. He was kind of all over the place, right? But he was mostly based in Washington, D.C., but he also traveled with McClellan as well, like for a bit during the Peninsula Campaign. But, after the major failure of the Peninsula Campaign, he's brought back to Washington during the Northern Virginia campaign. So Second Manassas and Chantilly and Ox Hill. And he's placed in command of the defenses of Washington.
Oh, wow.
And that's when he was like, oh my gosh, these forts are not strong enough. They're not big enough. They don't have big enough guns. And, well, and the thing was, he had been pressing. It's really interesting because I think the Army commanders, if they were assigned command of the Army of the Potomac, a part of their assignment was the protection of Washington, right? It was a part of the Department of the Potomac. And obviously asked McClellan, asked Joe Hooker, all those guys that it became like a major Achilles heel for them, right?
Right. That's one thing we mentioned on our last podcast is everything the Army of the Potomac does in one way or another is predicated on the idea that it is their job to protect Washington.
Right.
Right. And so you're going to see an organizational change, and this only comes after the Maryland campaign in 1862. But, Barnard is correct about this. He's, by the way, by the end of 1861, there's like 48 forts around D.C., and this number will go into the 60s by the end of the war. They've got all these artillery batteries, they called them. They got 30 miles of military road, over 30 miles of rifle pits connecting the forts.
30 miles of rifle pits?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the entire circumference of the city, according to McClellan, was basically was one giant earthwork, right?
Right.
I mean,
and you needed a garrison of
the most heavily defended cities in the world at that point.
Absolutely. And you needed a garrison, though, of heavy artillery men manning the big guns. You needed infantry soldiers in the rifle pits. And according to Barnard, you also needed the Army of the Potomac to work in unison with the defenses. And so it was kind of one of these issues that was never really fully remedied during the war. In 1863 is when the organizational structure changes, and they make DC its own corps or department. They reactivate the Department of Washington. So it's basically its own separate department, and they call it also the 22nd Army Corps. But Barnard was instrumental in all that. In 1864, he becomes Grant's, they call him the chief engineer of the armies in the field. So he becomes the top guy.
Now, maybe this is a spicy question. I don't know if spicy question is the right word for it, but when we talk about McClellan coming and really pretty much beefing up the forts, if you will, is he getting these numbers from Pinkerton? Is this something that's playing from the numbers? I know Pinkerton muffed numbers astronomically about the sizes of Confederate forces. And is this playing into why maybe he thinks that the forts aren't sufficient enough and maybe Barnard really had the forts in a proper place? Or was this something that genuinely was needing to happen?
No, I think it was generally something needing to happen.
Okay.
They were relying on, you know, stuff that, information that they were taught at West Point. And they had to cover these main avenues of approach to the city, not just roads, but also they had to cover high ground as well, right?
Right.
And open spaces. So it took a lot to do that. I mean, the forts themselves were built about 800 to 1,000 miles apart from each other. So, and then between the forts were the connecting rifle pits. But, you had, these forts provided mutual battery support to each other with our artillery, right? And so they became very effective. If you attack one fort, you're taking fire from multiple forts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the way they were. Yeah, absolutely, and that's the way they were designed. And if we talk about 1864 real quick,
Right.
when Cuba Early tries to attack the city and gets driven back, near Fort Stevens and the northern defenses and stuff, he actually writes what I believe is the best description of the defenses from an enemy combatant, because he writes to Robert E. Lee about a week or so after the battle in July of 1864, and he says, I get outside of Washington, my men are spent from fighting at Monocacy and marching about 40 miles, but he's like, what do I see outside of Washington? And he literally says this: a scientifically designed system of fortifications, where he said every foot of ground was swept by a crossfire of heavy artillery. Like, that's quite he didn't realize that the forts were lightly manned, because they were, a lot of troops were sent to reinforce Grant in Virginia, but they did their job, right? And so, they were quite imposing. The government spent a lot of money and manpower to build these, but they served their purpose.
Yeah, right. I imagine that they would. And 64 is an interesting year with those forts too. And Fort Stevens, you said, is one of the most instrumental. I think there's actually a battle at Fort Stevens, and this is almost the fort that collapsed and could have really decided the fate for Washington, right? I mean, it's that important to the city.
It is. Yeah, it sits right on top of this important road. We call it Georgia Avenue. It was called the 7th Street Road. It led right into Maryland. And there were multiple forts that were engaged, but this was the main. And this is the fort that Lincoln was at when he went to observe the battle and was under fire on July 12th.
Do you know the quote that was uttered about that? Do you mind sharing that with some of the people that may have not heard that?
Everyone, obviously, Lincoln was sanctified after the war. I mean, especially after his assassination, right? So, a lot of these accounts come after the war, of course, even decades after the war, with regimental histories and reunions and stuff. But, everyone wants to be connected to Abraham Lincoln. But the thing was, we believe, historians believe that Lincoln was out there both days.
Really?
Yeah, July 11th, perhaps for 30 minutes to an hour, not even that much more. If I recall, I think one of his goals was to show the people in Washington, and that everything was okay and they didn't have to panic. But around noon on July 11th that's when the Sixth Corps arrives off the Potomac River to reinforce the beleaguered garrison. So he goes down to greet the soldiers, and right off the Potomac Wharf, and it's like quite the scene there, a stirring scene. And then he comes back the next day, and sometime in the late afternoon, and he's gonna roll out there. And by the way, he's led up to the front of the fort by Major General Horatio Wright, who commands the Sixth Corps. And Horatio Wright later admits that he made a really big mistake here. Just kind of caught up in the moment here, but the president wanted to see what was going on, so he led him to the front of the fort, and he's kind of observing the battle from the parapet. And there was an officer, actually a surgeon, standing next to him, and this guy gets hit in the leg and goes down. And everyone's like, holy hell, the president's under direct fire basically. And so someone yells, apparently, of course, "Get down, you fool! Get down, you damn fool! Get out of here!" Do skedaddle, basically, right? And
I mean, an appropriate statement for being shot at.
especially
Absolutely.
when you're the president, okay? And so,
Somebody
and
should
yeah,
have said that
so-
to what's his name, the guy that was killed at Balls Bluff, the senator Baker. Someone should have
Edward
told him to
Baker,
get the hell
yeah.
out of the way. Yeah, we'll talk about that one afterwards. I want to ask you about that and the effect on Washington, because I pass his statue and his memorial in Capitol every day that I'm walking in the
Oh,
hall.
do
of
you?
Rep-
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
that was-
Yeah, we'll talk
was
about that in a second.
dramatic. But the thing was, I mean, it's interesting. So if people go to Fort Stevens, they'll see that there is a plaque commemorating that event, and it was actually dedicated by survivors of the Sixth Corps that fought at the battle. And the plaque literally shows Lincoln on top of the parapet next to Horatio Wright and the officer getting shot in the leg. It's crazy. The officer does survive. But yeah, that was as close as it gets. The Sixth Corps later, a couple brigades of the Sixth Corps will attack north that night and drive the Confederate Army out of D.C. But they were within maybe 100 yards of Fort Stevens before they were driven back. That's really close.
Yeah, it is. Well, yeah. How about Baker? Let's talk about him. Oh, tattooed historian. Thank you for rating our stream today. Wow, tattooed historian says fantastic.
Oh, we love John Heckman.
Yes, we
don't
do. Yeah, John Heckman is a great guy, man. I'm glad to have him in the stream tonight. Thank you for joining, bud. But yeah, let's talk about Edward Baker, because I think that is one of those, like said it earlier, we're gonna coin this term now, spicy topics. I like this. This is.
Yeah.
Is this our thing now? We're the spicy history podcast.
Yes, spicy history after dark.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You had a sitting senator get popped, faulty intelligence, accusations of basically treason. By the way, from charge that Charles Stone, who we just talked about, was the Inspector General of D.C. during the prior to the election, and was instrumental in basically ensuring that was that went through safely. I think the biggest thing with Baker going down was what happened afterward in Congress, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the Congress created the Joint Committee on the Conduct of War.
That's right. Oh, man, that's going to be a pain for a lot of generals later.
Oh my gosh, that changes everything.
Oh yes.
You've got these senators that have generals basically that they're aspiring to command the army and things like that. So obviously, I mean, it's always been a political war, of course, but man, once you have a sitting senator go down, the Senate has to get involved, right? And
it does.
So, yeah, you see that that these senators want to have more impact or influence on the conduct of the war, hence conduct of the war, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, it's my goodness, yeah. They were against most of the things that Lincoln was going for, right? I mean, they hated George McClellan, of course, right? They wanted to get rid of him quickly, and McClellan will be. McClellan's obviously still doing well at this point. I'm trying to remember when this was. Was it October of 61?
Yes, I think it was October 61. Actually, yeah, it was October. Had to have been
he's
October.
building up he's building up the Army of the Potomac, and they're going to go obviously into winter quarters soon.
Mm-hmm.
But there could also be a little bit of action, too, because there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot of uneasiness in DC, and there's going to be a lot of people losing patience as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we've got, they're going to have over 100,000 men around Washington in the camps, building the forts, comprising this, the new Army of the Potomac, and Congress is like, well, we're paying for this. Are you going to do something with this army, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously McClellan's like, we're not ready yet, and so
I am doing something. I'm training it.
What's that, Sean?
I am doing something. I'm training it.
Exactly, right? And so, yeah, you've got this kind of reconnaissance debacle. And if anyone's ever been out to Balls Bluff, I mean, it was not a good place to cross the river.
No.
And there were many federal units that the last thing you want to do is to be attacked with your back against a river. And there were so many. I think there was a New York unit that was trapped in this ravine, and almost all of them surrendered. So it was. It was a humiliating defeat. Let's say that.
Right. It's a prelude to Shepherdstown, because that's sort of the same ordeal there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
As we all
I
know,
think if people are really interested in that, I know at Gettysburg National Military Park, Chris Gwynn did a great presentation about Ball's Bluff.
Did he
And
really?
yeah, and it's
Oh
on the
man.
Gettysburg Facebook page when they used to record these videos for the Winter Lecture Series.
Okay.
I suggest people check that out. I would just search Gettysburg Ball's Bluff, and you get a really great understanding because he talks about the political ramifications of this as well.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to actually go and see if I can watch those myself. And I mean, I know Tater's in here. Tater, if you can go on YouTube and find that video for us, can you clip it and send it in the chat so people can go look that up if they don't mind? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, because I think those winter lecture series were very well done. You did one, did you not?
Yeah,
Have
I've
you
done
ever
a couple
spoken? Have
there.
you ever spoken anywhere like at Gettysburg Place or anything like that as a historian?
Well, at Gettysburg, I did the Battle of Fort Stevens, and then I think I guess that's almost 2 years now. I did. Oh, it was last year. John was there. John, the tattooed historian, was
Yeah,
there.
I must have. Bet he was.
just too many Johns.
I know, too many Johns. We did. I did one on Gettysburg and the Gettysburg campaign and the effect on the defenses of Washington, which was direct. It was really cool.
Awesome.
But yeah, the sad thing is that because I know it takes so much time, is they don't do the videos anymore because it just took so long to edit them. But the Ball's Bluff one, I suggest people go check that out to
Definitely.
learn more about the battle or the debacle.
The debacle. That's a better word for it. You can't even really. Go ahead.
I found it, and I can put it in the link for everyone.
Yeah, sure.
Well, as we all know, the Army of the Potomac has bad luck when it comes to crossing rivers when the Confederates are nearby.
That is a very good point.
Yes, they do.
So you were talking about Barnard. Did you know that he was did you know that he was deaf?
I did not know that he was deaf.
Yeah, and I just came across this, and I was
Wow.
and someone wrote a relatively short article about about this, about people that had what's the word I'm looking for here? Disabilities. Yes, I'm sorry, disabilities, and apparently that's why a lot of people described him as kind of standoffish and just kind of rough in regards to personality and stuff. It's well, yeah, he was quite deaf, and I think one of the reasons why he was such a successful in everything he did, from science, mathematics, obviously engineering, he was absolutely brilliant at that. It was kind of to kind of show that he was quite the brilliant person, even though he had this disability, right?
Right.
So was the deafness natural, or was it a result of his military?
No, I think it was natural, right? Yeah, he's from Massachusetts, and he actually he knew Abraham Lincoln, obviously because Lincoln toured the defenses of Washington. I actually found this letter on the Library of Congress of Barnard doing what these officers did so damn well back then and complain, right? And he basically argued that he deserved a promotion to Major General, and it was really interesting. And he made the argument that he should. I think. Well, I didn't see what Lincoln's response was, but by reading this, I think this letter to Lincoln was like the response to the first letter from Barnard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And apparently Lincoln said to him, "Well, a lot of the major generalcies are going to infantry commanders, right? Corps commanders, guys that are in the field." And Barnard was not very pleased with that answer because he's like, "Well, some of those guys are engineers like George Meade and who else? John Newton, obviously George McClellan. These are all engineers, right?" And he's like, "Well, the Army has tasked me with defending the Capitol, so why is it my fault that I'm not being promoted for it, right?" And so it's a really interesting letter. Eventually, he was breveted to Major General. So there you go. But after Lincoln's assassination, he writes a song called Lincoln's Death March, and it's super chilling. And I'm going to share that with everyone. someone shared this with me, and I was just like, "What is this? This is so cool." I had no idea that he wrote this death. I think it's called Lincoln's. It's called the President's. Hold on. It's called the Funeral March, and it was written by Barnard in 1865. So talk about like one of the most like intelligent, skilled people you'll ever meet. That was him.
He sounds interesting. Like I said, I was learning a little bit about him this morning actually, and I was gonna say I need to talk to Steve about this tonight because I think he might know a little bit about him. And man, am I not disappointed?
Yeah, I'm interested to see what people think about this funeral march that he wrote. This composition. I sent it to a friend before, and he's like, "This kind of sounds like Star Wars."
No kidding.
Yeah,
Man was ahead of his time.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like the Imperial March. It was kind of really interesting.
That's an interesting choice for Lincoln.
No kidding.
Yeah. So what else are you guys thinking about right now?
What, John? I want to see what you got, man.
What do I got? I'm not sure I've got much of anything. I mean, Steve's done a pretty good job of walking us through a lot of it. I mean, I guess one thing is we haven't talked much about, other than Fort Stevens, we haven't really talked much about 1864 yet.
Yeah, maybe we should touch on that for the rating. We got about 15 minutes left. Might as well.
Yeah, hey, I want to bring up something really quickly from
Sure.
1864 that I found really interesting that I came across the other day. And it was really cool because it talked about comparing 1861 to 1864 in DC. Okay.
Okay.
So the newspaper was talking about how much it changed over the span of the obviously the last 4 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the inauguration was in 1865, but one of the big differences is a part of the procession for Lincoln's second inauguration in 1865 was United States colored troops were involved.
Really? Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah, apparently they came from Camp. They were from Camp Casey, and somewhere in Arlington. I think people are still trying to discover where that camp is at.
Mm-hmm.
But what a change, though, right?
Yeah, it is.
From the beginning of the Civil War, when the initial Secretary of War, Simon Cameron, he literally writes to this African-American gentleman, I believe in D.C., who offered his services and the services of other African-Americans. Is like, this department is, not planning to take on any basically black volunteers, right? And then 4 years later, you've got black soldiers wearing blue uniforms marching in the procession, right? Like, that's something... Yeah, that was just, I just think about how much the war had changed American society even up to that point, right?
Yeah, complete difference. And that, I think, again, that speaks volumes as to where the country was at in 64 going into 65 and what it speaks about how the war was going to, because, that's when the USCTs are really starting to be very prevalent in some of these major battles in the East and the West.
And the South as well,
Yeah,
right?
in the South, absolutely.
And forging this... forging this life post-war as well, right? This idea that, we're not just fighting for like freedom, but we're fighting for more than that. Like, we're fighting for like citizenship, right? The right to own property and to really to pursue the so-called like American dream as anyone else in this country does, right? And so that's a dramatic transformation from 1861. So that really stuck out to me. And that's the big thing I took from that newspaper account, because, they listed Lincoln's entire, famous, second inaugural address. I think Gary Gallagher said it's like his most important political speech ever. But that's kind of what stuck out to me. I think I'm sure you guys have read about, that day was like a very overcast day. And then at the last moment, it kind of opened up, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the newspaper account really does say. It said like that morning, like trees were getting knocked down and people were running for cover and stuff because there was a lot of rain and just like really pretty rough weather. And it just, didn't get much better until Lincoln stepped out there. And then like, I don't know, it's kind of like, like the heaven opened up and like shined this light on him. And it was kind of cool reading this newspaper account, just to kind of hear everything that was going on.
It wasn't Booth in attendance, like very close to Lincoln in that 64 inauguration or 65 inauguration.
He was,
I
yeah.
thought about
Apparently,
that, yeah.
yeah. I think people have located him in that image, right? That famous image of
Right,
Lincoln
and
on
that's
the
what I
stage.
was. I remember seeing it somewhere, but I mean, he was like, no, I wouldn't say arm's length, but pretty damn close to arm's length to Lincoln.
Yeah, and
That-
it just shows like how close people were to public officials back then. Of
right.
course, right? I mean,
You
it was a
had,
lot. You're right up to the Capitol, right?
I
You're
yeah,
right
mean,
up top of it.
you could literally go and talk to the president himself,
yeah.
and plead your case for certain requests. So I mean, it was the access that Americans had to their political leadership was significantly less restrictive
Right. I
back
think
then
so.
than it is today.
Hey, John. So I know you've done a lot of research on like the Army of Potomac and stuff like that. And have you come across a lot of accounts of them talking about the '64 election and voting for Lincoln and all that?
Um, so I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind was I'm trying to remember which officer it was, and it was interesting that Lincoln had gotten a report that some U.S. Corps commanders, or that a U.S. Corps commander, were pressuring his subordinates to vote in a particular way. That he was basically ordering them that you had to vote for one way or the other. And I don't think Lincoln was informed of which way this officer was telling him they had to vote. So Lincoln sends this letter to this Corps commander, says, "Hey, listen, this election is going to be held freely. Those men have the right to their own political views, and you're going to you're going to ensure that every single soldier who wants to vote gets to vote, and he gets to vote freely."
Hmm.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
glad there's that assurance, though. You know.
But other than that, I can't say that I've not delved super deeply into personal accounts of stuff going on in 1864 yet.
Okay.
So beyond that, I don't have much that immediately comes to mind.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think comparing it to '61 as we kind of started off with, the military presence in '65 in March for the inauguration obviously was heavy, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you see some of the images from it, there are a lot of soldiers there, and I'm sure they were given orders to shine their brass, and you can tell a lot of them were wearing white gloves. I love the inclusion of the USCT troops in there, which are being organized around the country, including DC and Virginia and Maryland and things like that. And obviously at this point the forts are at their peak, so there's troops all over the city, right? So quite the difference from 1861. I think it's I think it's probably a bit of a somber mood for some people, but also obviously because of 4 years of war and death and destruction, but also like this idea of hope, right? That this and with the coming campaigns in the spring, that finally like this epic bloodletting will be over and we could really build a new country in many ways, right? This unfinished work that they were really trying to complete, they were in their process of completing that, right? And so I think if I recall what that newspaper account was saying, I think it was a Republican newspaper, and so they're very positive of the president's remarks, but it just seemed like it was less tense in the city than it was in 1861. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, in some ways, I would think things were more tense, or say things were more tense in the Army command in 1864. I mean, one of the biggest, you've got this huge ticking clock in the minds of Army of the Potomac commanders, and Grant in particular, now that he's in charge of the Army as a whole in 1864, where he's like, there are legitimate concerns that Lincoln is not going to win the election.
That's a great point.
And when the 1864 campaigns really start to kick off, they did not yet know who the opposing candidate was going to be. And of course, it ends up being George B. McClellan. But there's this absolute imperative, it seems, that Grant and his subordinates are kind of desperate to not only win the war, but to win the war quickly. And there's this instance that happens at Wilderness. So Wilderness is the first battle of the Overland Campaign. It's the first major engagement in the what tends to be called the Eastern Theater of the War after Gettysburg, and the casualties are just horrendous. Sometimes what I'll tell people is that the casualties at Wilderness were larger than the entire U.S. Presence at the Battle of Yorktown during the Revolution.
That really puts it into perspective, doesn't it?
And General Warren, who at this point is commander of the U.S. Fifth Corps, is getting the casualty reports coming in, and he's at his headquarters at Elwood Manor, and he's telling a subordinate overhears him say that these numbers will not do.
That's right. He does shorten them, doesn't he? In his official reports.
He shuffles men from the killed column into the missing column because of fear of the impact at home, and because of fear that impact will negatively affect Lincoln's election chances.
And I think, with that being said, I know Steve wanted to try to get out of here at 9:30. We're running at 9:28 here, so we got a few minutes left to do our closing remarks for Steven. I'm going to be sticking around for just a 30-minute just chatting on Twitch here. That will be, I guess, post podcast. So John, if you would like to stick around for that too, please feel free to.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll stick around. And Steve, again, you were offered to, but I know you got to work, so it's 100% okay if you got to buzz out of here at 9:30.
Well, let me say this.
Sure.
Man, so John, I thought you were going to talk about I guess it's everyone talks about it, and you saw it in that documentary about Grant of them marching south instead of retreating, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that's what you're going to talk about. I didn't know that Warren fluffed the numbers there.
He cooks the books.
He cooks the books.
Wow.
And there's a monument to the 100 something New York. I forget the exact regiment off the top of my head at Saunders Field on the Wilderness. And the killed and missing numbers on that monument are based off the official records, which are from Warren's cooked books. So that monument, it's the best numbers we have, but it's a lie.
Wow.
I didn't never even took that into perspective at all. I forgot about that completely.
I appreciate you sharing that. That's something so who discovered that? Is it in a book, or is it?
If I remember right, the staff officer who was present wrote it in a letter or in his memoirs. I'll need to double check on that. I'll get the sourcing for that for you.
It's not Maurice Shad. No, Maurice Shad wouldn't have been him. Wait, was it? There's that book. It's not campaigning with Grant, because that would have been Horace Porter, and Horace Porter wasn't with Warren.
Right.
But Maurice Shab, who was he with? John, does that name ring a bell?
Not the top of my head.
Oh, there's so many names to remember. It can get so confusing sometimes, especially if you're into like a situation where you're reading multiple different history books in different time periods. When like Stonewall Jackson's sailing on the USS Arizona to San Juan
Right.
Hill, you're like, oh, wait a minute,
Something's not right here.
Yeah, no. Oh man, well, yeah, Steve. I can't thank you enough for coming on here in the show, man. We'd love to have you back. We're here to really do talk history, but have it as a general discussion like we did here. And I think doing that, it was very well, because it's thought provoking, and we come out with so many things.
I'm honored to be here. It's good to chat with you, gents, and hope the viewers enjoyed it. And I'd love to be back. I was unsure of how this would look, but this was a lot of fun, and I think we're able to talk about many aspects of the Civil War, just talk amongst friends and kind of and talk about what's going on in our country, and just the correlations with history. And I don't know, I think when we experience what we've experienced and seen what we've seen over the past couple of weeks, it kind of like refocuses our passion with the Civil War, right? I just think so. With history in general, but of course, like we're all Civil War geeks here, and then so
100%.
We're finding letters from like January of 1861 or newspaper accounts talking about, there's like political agitation. It's like, wow, okay, this kind of spot on,
Yeah.
So,
and for like.
Back whenever you guys need me, I will be here. So.
100%. Yeah, this is a normal thing. A lot of the way our show is structured, we have something every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I know, like I said, Tattooed Historian has agreed to come on, so we're having him on February 3rd. That'll be a Wednesday. Wednesday seems to be the day to do the guests and have everybody on here.
Troll John Heckman. That's going to be. Oh man!
I shouldn't have told him that.
Yeah, no. He was in here in the chat on Twitch, so he said hello. He said you were fantastic. You know, had a wonderful play on words.
Well, you know, John's one of my favorite history people, and I think what he's doing is, he's taken, you know, something as, you know, history can seem as old and antiquated and sometimes academic, of course, and he's made it kind of fresh and inviting. And welcoming to people with all different interests and backgrounds, right? So
100%.
I don't know why the hell I'm saying nice things about John Heckman.
I know, because he said he can't wait for the stream, and then he said, "Bring it, Phan." So he's.
But I love John Heckman. He's one of my great friends, and I appreciate you guys doing the same thing as well. And I think history and just talking about just life in general has become a lot more accessible from everyone now. And so you've got all these all these different type of, you know, programs and you know, apps and things where we can really connect with people. And, you know, if you're John Heckman, you can sell more shirts. Okay, so I know he's thinking about his merch brand. So
yeah, I've got some merch now too. If I got to make that plug in there, we do have some hoodies and we have some Gumpy Battlefield gear. We've even got backpacks and water bottles because, you know, we just want to stay hydrated when we're rocking those battlefields.
I can't believe you didn't mention that like within the first 5 minutes. Okay, that's what John Heckman does. So
he's smart. He gets his stuff right out there. I'm not trying to push it too much because I just love having conversation with these guys. But at the same time, having conversation in Mr. Oculio gear just makes it that much cooler.
Well, guys, I'm gonna go drink some. Is it Tim Hortons coffee? I'm gonna take a shower with my tattooed historian shirt on and hit the bed. Okay, so.
Sounds like a plan, Steve. We thank you so much for being around, guys. In about 5 minutes, we'll come right back really quickly with some just chatting. But Steve, thank you again for being with us. We can't wait
cheers,
to have
guys.
you back.
Appreciate you guys, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Anytime, bud. Have a good one.
All right, bye.
Later.